Hi, I'm Delegate Nick Freitas, a candidate for the United States Senate in Virginia, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit today about immigration reform. First things first, I believe we need to rigorously enforce our federal immigration laws. In addition to that, we need to make sure that we fund the border wall in order to increase border security, both for the benefit of our citizens and for the people that want to immigrate here legally. We also need to move to a merit-based immigration system, which ensures that we give priority to the people that have the skills and the desire to become Americans. I've not only said this publicly, but if you look at my voting record in the Virginia General Assembly, I have voted every year I've been there to shut down sanctuary cities and to require state and local law enforcement to cooperate with federal law enforcement in enforcing immigration policy. Now, one of the reasons why I bring this up to you today is because we had a debate recently, and following that debate, Corey Stewart decided to deliberately lie about my policy and my record on immigration reform. I have never been for open borders, and I'm certainly not for sanctuary cities, and I have a voting record to prove it. What Corey Stewart suggested at that debate is quite frankly terrifying for anyone that actually believes in the Constitution and the 10th Amendment. He said he wanted the federal government to criminally prosecute any state or local law enforcement agency that didn't enforce immigration law. Now, superficially, this sounds great, but if you've been paying attention for the last 100 years, here's what you understand about federal law. If you give the federal government an inch, they're going to take a mile. They're not going to reduce that just to federal immigration law. What will end up happening if Corey Stewart gets his way is the federal government will actually criminally prosecute any state and local law enforcement official for not enforcing any federal law or regulation or rule or tax or fee. So I want you to imagine a scenario like this. Murder, rape, child molestation, most violent crime is not federal law, it's state law. What do you think your local officials should be prioritizing? If I have a murder or if I have an EPA violation, I want my sheriff focused on the murder. Sheriffs should not be required to enforce EPA regulations. That's the federal government's responsibility. But if Corey Stewart gets his way, the unintended consequence will be this. If we ever, God forbid, have a Hillary Clinton presidency, they will use the mechanism that Corey Stewart wants to use in order to criminally prosecute sheriffs and local law enforcement that don't agree with a federal agenda on everything from Department of Transportation laws to EPA violations. So now, when the EPA shows up and tells that local sheriff, you need to give me a deputy to go determine whether or not a pond on someone's property now qualifies as a wetland, under Corey Stewart's way, that deputy would have to go and do that. That sheriff would have to reallocate resources to that purpose away from far more important criminal activity. Let's just set the record straight. I am for the border wall. I am for rigorously enforcing federal immigration law. I'm for state and local governments assisting the federal government in enforcing that federal immigration law. And should a state or locality obstruct the federal government in enforcing immigration law, that is when we can go after them with prosecution. But I am not willing to do what too many other politicians have done, and that's to throw out the Constitution and to throw out the 10th Amendment as soon as it becomes politically expedient. Corey, we've got enough politicians in Washington, D.C. that will throw out the Constitution to make a point or to try to achieve their objective. But what I understand, and you apparently don't, is this. Federalism exists for a reason. The Constitution exists for a reason. And when you give the federal government powers that it was never intended to have, you don't just give it for Donald Trump and you don't just give it for yourself. You give it for whoever occupies that office. I'm Delegate Nick Freitas, running for U.S. Senate in Virginia. I have a strong record on immigration, and I plan to vote that way when I'm a United States Senator. And I just want to say one other thing. If you're wondering why we have a hard time winning statewide as Republicans sometimes, it's not because we don't have the vote. It's because we have some unscrupulous candidates out there that have decided to bash their fellow Republicans instead of just simply making their point to the people of Virginia. Well, I'm not going to do that. I will always be upfront and honest with you. That's where I stand. I thank you for letting me set the record straight.